Welcome to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jackie. And today, our topic will be on faith and the environment. And our first guest for today is Joelle Novey, who is the director of Interfaith Power and Light. Joelle, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming.
So good to be here.
All right. First question, can you give us some background information about your organization?
Sure. Interfaith Power and Light is a small organization in this area in Northern Virginia, in D.C., and throughout the state of Maryland that works with congregations of any faith that are responding to climate change from within their religious traditions. So we support congregations in doing education around environmental issues. We support congregations in finding ways to green their facilities. And we support congregations in speaking out on environmental issues in the public square. And in doing this work, we're one of about 40 state affiliates of Interfaith Power and Light all over the country that are engaging tens of thousands of congregations in responding as people of faith to environmental issues.
Okay. And how has your organization been involved here in Northern Virginia with the faith communities?
We work with congregations, including many in Northern Virginia, to do each of those things, to educate, to invite congregations to bring messages about environmental issues into their programs. We have a speakers bureau that brings guest speakers and workshops into congregations. We have a film library where congregations can borrow environmental films. We support congregations that want to go green in their facilities and find ways to do that. I often say that the person who is trying to start a green team or do green initiatives in their congregation sometimes feels like the green sheep in their community. They feel a little lonely. Sometimes the clergy or the other folks in their congregation don't quite get it or don't support them. And so a lot of what we do to support congregations in greening their facilities is really about supporting those green sheep, cheering them on, letting them know they're not alone, that there are other folks who care about this in other faith communities down the street or around the corner. We provide a place where the green sheep can flock together, a green leaders listserv where they can share ideas and encouragement and resources. And there's lots of wonderful interfaith dialogue that takes place on that listserv, not dialogue for the sake of dialogue, but very practical questions. So people ask, we have to replace our boiler. Did anyone have to do that? And then someone from another faith tradition will say, yes, we did have to deal with that last year, and here's what we thought about, and here's what we did. We've tried to support congregations in going solar by sharing the stories of the first pioneering local congregations to put up solar. And we also serve as a place where congregations that are ready can get involved in advocacy opportunities, speaking out on environmental issues that they care about. One that's local and is on my mind today. We're taping this on October 1st, and today is the day that the coal-fired power plant on the Alexandria waterfront is finally closing. And that was a campaign that many local congregations participated in to try to shut down that dirty polluter that was in our community.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a really happy day where we're getting to see a dirty power source going away and making way for cleaner power.
Oh, okay, awesome. Sounds exciting. Okay, definitely. And what do you do in your outreach to target faith communities? Do you go door to door to teach them about environmental issues? Do you get the horn and say, hey, this is important? What do you do?
So to raise this question of what's happening in our world and what should we be doing about it in a congregation, often the way the conversation starts is simply by asking a very simple question. And I can ask this question in church basements, but I can also invite anyone who's listening at home to think about this question wherever you're sitting, which is to simply become aware for a moment about anywhere in the room where you're sitting where you're using electricity. Is something plugged in? Maybe the TV you're watching, maybe the lights in the room are using electricity, maybe if you're in a facility of some kind, the exit signs are on all the time and they're using electricity, the temperature controls. So we're often not even aware of our electricity use, so even just taking that deep breath and looking around and realizing we're using electricity, that's a very powerful question to ask in a faith community of any tradition. And then when I've asked people to become aware of their electricity use in the room where they're sitting, then I can ask them to tell the story. What is the story of that electricity? Where did it come from? And the fact is that in Northern Virginia, about half of that electricity was made by burning coal. And we can tell the story of that electricity from the time that coal was mined all the way until it was burned and beyond. So first, we tell the first chapter of that story, which is about mountaintop removal coal mining, which is going on in our own state in the southwestern corner of Virginia itself, where there's this incredibly destructive mining practice where they're putting explosives directly into the mountains and blowing apart mountains forever and dumping the waste rock into valley streams. They've destroyed several hundred mountains and several thousand miles of streams. And you can imagine for the communities that live around this kind of mining, they watch the skyline of their childhood disappear. In addition to it being very scary and very damaging to the community's health, it's also deeply upsetting to watch the mountain you always used to live near not be there anymore, that the mountain you thought would be there forever. So there's this, the first chapter of our electricity use is the first chapter of this story is a story about the destruction of these Appalachian mountains. Then the coal is processed and washed, and the resulting waste product is this very thick, toxic sludge called slurry that's kept in big impoundment ponds in the crook between two mountains, also usually in Appalachian communities, where it puts the communities at risk of a lot of flooding and scary disasters from this toxic sludge leaking, but it also really damages the groundwater. And they've been able to show, public health researchers have been able to show that there is just living near mountaintop removal processing counties, living in those counties is bad for your health, that people have more sickness and more death in communities that are forced to live around this mountaintop removal, mining, and processing. So the first two chapters of our electricity is really a story of making people sick, not very far from here.
Right.
And the third chapter is about coal burning. We do not distribute coal-fired power plants around this country evenly so that we all bear the health impacts evenly. In fact, coal-fired power plants are disproportionately located in low-income communities of color, and once there's one toxic facility in a community, it becomes much easier to put a second one, and so often we're asking particular communities to bear the health impacts of multiple toxic facilities all in a close area. The United Church of Christ did a study recently and found that race is still the most predictive factor for where toxic facilities like coal-fired power plants will be located in the U.S. So there's something deeply unfair about the health impacts of burning coal. And many people, when I speak in congregations, do have a sense that there's more asthma in this younger generation than when they were growing up or when their parents were growing up. And the air pollution from coal-fired power plants is part of the story of what's going on with that. Likewise, a lot of people have heard that there's a lot of mercury in the water and in the air, and that it's really dangerous to eat certain fish, especially if you're a woman of childbearing age, and that the many women have an unhealthy amount of mercury in their body already, and that mercury is coming from coal-fired power plants. We forget where all that mercury is coming from. It's the number one source is from burning coal for our electricity. So that's the first three chapters of the story of our electricity. When we ask a church or people in their faith community, how is your electricity being made? The first three chapters are about coal being blown out of the mountains and coal being processed and coal being burned. But we actually have to tell one more chapter, and that's about what's happening to our climate. And this is the part that's often hard for people to hear, and that's why I'm glad to talk to them in their faith community, because it's a place where they already come to struggle with hard questions, to think about how they can be better people. It's a place where they grieve. It's a place where they celebrate. So I'm very grateful to be able to raise this question of the fourth chapter of where our electricity comes from in their community and in their safe, sacred community. So coal-fired power plants are our nation's single greatest source of the heat-trapping pollution that is causing our temperature to rise. It's as if the Earth had previously been wearing like a lightweight cotton sweater, like you might wear to Easter, that kept us a little bit warmer than we would have been otherwise, but a good temperature for life on Earth. And over the last 150 years, by burning coal and other fossil fuels, we have put this heat-trapping climate pollution in our atmosphere. It's like we're wearing a ski jacket instead of that light Easter sweater, and it's caused our temperature to rise about 1.4 degrees on average over the last 150 years. If you look at a temperature graph, global average temperature over the last several hundred years, it's variable. It's a zigzag because our temperature is variable year over year. There are warmer years and cooler years, but the zigzag is going up.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm married to a math teacher, so he has helped impress upon me the importance of the slope of a line. Not just is it going up, but how fast is it going up? And that's the really scary thing, is that if we look at the speed at which our temperature is going up, it's getting steeper and steeper. So it looks as if we won't have another 150 years to get used to that next 1.4 degree increase if we're on some kind of steeper line or a curve. And a lot of people, when they hear this in their faith communities, they do have some sense of what would happen if we don't do anything about this, if we continue to put heat-trapping climate pollution in our atmosphere and the temperature continues to rise. They've heard that the land-based ice on the poles might melt, causing sea level rise. And it's one thing to think about something like that happening in Florida, right, where there'd be a lot of resources to help people relocate. It's another to think about flooding happening in a place like Bangladesh, where many millions of people live very close to sea level and are very poor. People have heard that this would affect animals and plants, that they might not be able to adapt fast enough to a rapidly warming climate. Right. Bill McKibben, a climate writer, has said that we are watching Genesis in reverse in this generation. Really? So very intense stuff, that we might see a third of all plants and animals ever not be able to survive the way we've polluted our climate. We depend on the earth for food. We forget that. We think we just get food at the supermarket, but we're actually dependent on the cycles of the earth bringing forth food on the same schedules that they have in the past, and there'd be really serious disruptions to where we can grow different things than from what we're used to in a rapidly warming climate. A lot of diseases are spread by mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes used to be controlled by these colder temperatures, but they thrive at warmer temperatures. So lots of new diseases are a bigger problem in a warming climate, and that's where there's a real injustice to the way this plays out, because it's people in parts of Africa and in South Asia who are experiencing outbreaks of things like dengue fever and malaria. But the reason those things are such a bigger problem, the reason stronger storms are a bigger problem, is actually because of the climate pollution that other countries, not them, have contributed to our atmosphere. Bill McKibben, again, talked about being in Dhaka, Bangladesh, during an outbreak of dengue fever, and he was being interviewed, and he said, "I was thinking to myself, God, this is unfair. These people have done nothing to deserve this." Right. He said, "The epidemiology isn't perfect, but the moral math works for me. If there are 100 beds in that hospital and our country produces 25% of the climate pollution, then 25 of those beds are on us." Exactly. Really inviting people to take responsibility for the way our climate pollution impacts people around the world. So I'm sitting in this congregation telling the story of our electricity, and I invite them to think back over that all the chapters of that story that are part of how their sanctuary is being lit. The story of the mountains being destroyed, the story of coal processing, the story of coal burning and the ways it makes people sick, and ultimately the serious, irrevocable, permanent, global impact of polluting our climate to the point that we've really changed and warmed the Earth's temperature. And suddenly, it's much clearer what we're wasting when we waste electricity. Yeah. And I don't have to ask people, does this relate to your faith tradition? Because if I ask them, based on everything you've heard, if your congregation was going to truly live out its faith, whatever faith that is, in light of this information, how would this building look different? And they close their eyes and they tell me. I don't have to say it. They know there would be solar panels on the roof. They know there would be a bike rack. They know people would get there differently, would use recycled paper, would compost. So it's about helping people follow through on that vision.
You're so passionate, but we gotta take a break and we'll be right back.
Experts predict that by the end of this century, land and water resources will become scarce, and climate change will irreversibly alter our planet. But what the experts haven't calculated is the power of the human will to come together to protect the future of our natural world. If you're ready to make a difference that lasts, Visit the Nature Conservancy at nature.org today.
Welcome back to Interfaith Connections, and we are here with Joelle giving us all the scoop on her organization, Interfaith Power and Light. So would you like to continue your story with us?
Well, we invite congregations, people in their congregations, to envision what their community would look like if they took seriously the story of what's happening to our world, to the way the climate is changing, and took that to heart and really strove to live out their own values and their own tradition with respect to that information. They took it to its logical conclusion and let it really transform their community. And I asked them to envision what would that look like. And usually they can see it. I spoke to a Green Muslim group recently, and I asked them, how would your community be different if you took this all to heart? And they said, no water bottles during Ramadan. So apparently there was lots of plastic water bottles given out in a lot of masjids during Ramadan, and someone had this clear vision that wouldn't be the case anymore when their community was totally in harmony with nature. And likewise, when I've asked that question in churches and in synagogues, people have very strong vision of what that would look like. They know that they would get power from clean, renewable sources like wind or solar panels on the roof. They know people would get to church or to synagogue or to the masjid or to the temple by biking or by taking public transit or by walking or by carpooling, so there's at least fewer cars. They have a sense that the grounds would be used to grow food, either for the community or for other people in need. So they can see it, and a lot of times that's where our work begins, is in supporting people of faith in getting closer to those visions, in figuring out how to get from here to there. And so we work to support green teams and green team leaders in working step by step towards that vision of what their congregation would look like if they were truly living out their own values in light of the climate crisis we're all facing.
Okay. And can you share with us some stories on some of the organizations or the churches here in the area or the other faith communities that your organization has been involved in?
Yes. I mean, it's been so inspiring to me to see the way congregations across Northern Virginia have really led on environmental issues and done some wonderful work. St. Paul's Episcopal in Alexandria has done a lot of work on energy efficiency, getting rid of refrigerators they weren't really using. They had an energy audit that helped them decide what to fix first, and have done a lot of work to improve their energy efficiency. Your church, the Unity Church of Fairfax, has done a wonderful job using native plants throughout their grounds and educating the community about native plants. They green-roofed the surface of one of the buildings so that rainwater is slowed down on its way into the local rivers, and that entire space is this wonderful beacon for the whole community to come learn about native plants and to connect with nature outdoors. Mount Vernon Unitarian Church on this hill in Alexandria is one of the first local churches and one of the first in Northern Virginia, certainly, to put up solar panels to generate energy from heaven for their congregation. Temple Rodef Shalom is a large Reformed Jewish community in Falls Church that's done a lot of advocacy. They have spoken out in particular against coal-fired power plants, both new ones proposed for elsewhere in Virginia and existing ones that they wanted to see shut down on the Alexandria waterfront. And just this past summer, the Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center in Falls Church had a green iftar, a green break-fast meal after the fasting from Ramadan, where they talked about environmental issues, learned from young people in their community who were doing environmental projects, and tried to have the meal itself be a low-waste meal. So there's so much exciting work going on in diverse congregations all over this area.
And how can new congregations or new faith communities, they hear about your organization, they want to get involved? How can they get to you?
If there's someone out there who really wants to take green action within their congregation and isn't sure where to start, the first thing I would have them know is that they are in very, very good company, that there are people who are passionate about taking action on environmental issues, going green, and solving these problems in every congregation, in hundreds of congregations in this area, and that they can by getting involved with our organization, they can get in touch with those other folks and join together with them and be working in a group. So they can contact us at our website, GWIFL.org, to get involved. And I would invite also for new Green Team leaders, especially in congregations, to try and focus on doing no more than 3 things. Sometimes there's a tendency to try to do hundreds of things because there's so many ideas and there's so many environmental problems to tackle. But I would invite them to try and pick 3 things and to think about doing one in each of 3 categories. So our organization is structured this way too. We educate, we help people green their facilities, and we invite them to get involved in advocacy. The way our website is organized and the way the website puts it is learn, go green, and speak out. Okay. So if a Green Team leader is trying to figure out where to start in your congregation, I would invite you to find one thing you can do in each category. Find one thing you can do to educate people in your community about environmental issues or the way your environmental issues connect to your scripture. That's learning. Then can you find one thing to go green? So something you can do in your facility or in your life together as a community or in people's homes that greens your actual lifestyle so that your own impact on the environment is lessened. And there's so many ways to do that. I talked with many congregations about shifting off of styrofoam coffee cups at coffee hour. That's a very common issue. Or figuring out how to use fewer pesticides on the grounds is another very common thing that's on people's minds. Or saving electricity, saving energy so that we're using less of that coal-fired power. And then third, I would invite every congregation to find one way to get involved in the larger community on environmental issues. That I don't think that education or going green in our own personal lives are enough by themselves, that we also need to be getting involved in the larger conversation about how our city and how our state and how our country is responding to climate and energy issues. One of the things that I do in my role as the director of Interfaith Power and Light is to find opportunities for the faith community to speak out on environmental issues where I think that voice will make a big difference, and to invite our congregations to get involved when the moment comes. A good example is the Environmental Protection Agency periodically puts out new safeguards to protect people from pollutants. So recently the EPA proposed new rules that would protect people from mercury from coal-fired power plants. And there's a public comment period after those rules are proposed where anyone in the country can give their opinion about whether we would like to see those rules enacted or not. And you can bet that every dirty coal-fired power company in the country tells the EPA during that time that they don't want any more rules and they don't want to protect people from the pollution. So that's a really wonderful opportunity for the faith community. You can print up some postcards, or we'll send you some postcards that people can sign saying, as a person of faith, I do support the EPA in enacting these safeguards to protect me and my family from mercury. And you can collect those after services and have people sign up at a little card table and send the postcards back to us, and then we bring them to the EPA. So that's the kind of occasion for advocacy that fits right into the life of a congregation. We also, sometimes there are big rallies on environmental issues here in our area. We live close to the nation's capital, so we sometimes get to be part of really big environmental actions. But it's nice to have a faith contingent, a place where people from their churches and synagogues and masjids, whatever congregation they're part of, can come and stand together at the rally and say, all of us, because of our faith tradition, because of our deepest values, care about this issue and want to stand together for this issue. So there are lots and lots of ways, if you connect up with our organization, to find ways to link up with exciting environmental advocacy opportunities.
Okay. Because I said one question I do have, for some communities that may not want to get involved in the political or advocacy side, how can, I guess, either as an individual or maybe as a group, can organizations still support the initiatives? Are there alternatives, like for those who may not want to get out there and go to Capitol Hill? Or you know.
I think that there are there's no better expert about what is going to work for your congregation right now than the Green Team leader who's part of that congregation. Okay. So I really leave it up to the Green Team leaders to decide which campaign or initiative or opportunity is really a good fit for their community. As I said, I encourage congregations only to do 3 things, no more than 3 things. So, start where the passion is, start where there's energy, start where people are ready and excited to take a step. I do think that finding some way to get involved in the larger conversation is key, but it might take a little while. It might not be right now. It may be that specific individuals in a congregation will join us,
Right.
but it will be a long time before they could bring some kind of activity into the church building or pass a resolution by the board in support of an issue. But there's so much good work to do long before you get to that point. So.
Okay. And what are the strengths and challenges your organization has experienced?
I mean, I think one of the blessings and the challenges of the climate problem is just that it's so big. We're not going to be able to solve it unless we all work together. And that's very daunting and can be very dispiriting, both for me and for the people I work with, that we face such a serious and urgent challenge that can feel overwhelming. But there's also a way in which it's so big that it calls our bluff.
Yeah.
If there were things that used to divide us, like we wouldn't have cooperated with people who are different from us, or we wouldn't have cooperated with people who have a different faith tradition, suddenly the only earth any of us have ever known is really in danger of changing irrevocably in ways that we don't want to see, and we all have that in common. It really calls us to our kind of common humanity and invites us to cooperate across boundaries that we might not have been willing to cross before. So that's part of the beauty of this work also, is that I see people being brave enough to come together across their differences to work together because this problem touches them so deeply.
And what are your organization next steps and new projects that are coming up, or new ventures you would like to see the Interfaith Power and Light take the stronger leadership role in our community?
One thing I'd like to see is the day when any congregation that wants to put up solar panels can figure out how to finance it without a lot of delay and a lot of complication. Right now we have about 9 pioneering congregations in the entire D.C. metro area, Northern Virginia, and all of Maryland that I know of that have put up solar panels. By the time this airs, there might be 11 because there are 2 more under contract. But it's still a very small number of pioneers that have put in the time to figure out the financing and make this happen. And we're working to make it easier so that those congregations that came first can support the new ones in making this less overwhelming, less complicated, figure out the financing, and have a company come put solar on your roof so you can get energy from heaven within a few months of when you first had that idea.
Right.
So that's one project we're working on, and we have put out a solar booklet that you can download from our website that tells the stories of the first 9 congregations in the D.C. metro area that put up solar, and you can learn from them about what worked, what they wish they'd known, what their advice is to new congregations on solar. So that's one big next frontier. The other is that up until now, we've served the D.C. metropolitan area, including Northern Virginia and the Maryland suburbs of D.C., but over the coming year, we're going to form formally the Maryland Interfaith Power and Light program, which will serve the whole state of Maryland, including starting in Baltimore and including the whole state by the end of the year. So that's an exciting new venture for us to bring this work to the state that I grew up in.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate everything you've discussed, and we look forward to seeing more from Interfaith Power and Light. And we will be right back on Interfaith Connections.
Pants. I am folding the pants. Do they go on my head?
Everyday moments can become teaching moments because learning starts long before school does. Give your child the start they need at bornlearning.org.
There is a practical way to reduce air pollution. Just go to EnergyStar.gov, where the EPA can show you how to make a difference.
Welcome back to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jackie, and today we're focusing on faith in the environment. And we have a leader from our local community here with us today. Her name is Sara Scherschlight, and she is with the Peace Lutheran Church in Alexandria, Virginia. Thank you, Sara, for coming on the program.
My pleasure.
And can you share with our audience the background information about you, what you have done in your career, just background information before we go into our discussion?
Sure. I am currently serving as the senior pastor at a Lutheran church in Alexandria, but I've only been there for 2 weeks, and it's a new call for me. Formerly, I was up at a church in Maryland, and that church, Prince of Peace in Maryland, was actively involved in green issues. We won the Gaithersburg Environmental Award a few years back, and did a lot for creation work there. In addition to being a pastor, I also work with our synod, which is our local organization of about 80 Lutheran churches in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area, and I help lead our collective creation care work. So I do a lot of work with all the local churches.
Okay. So what has been done so far in the green movement at your church? What initiatives or projects?
Yeah, one thing I'm so excited about at Peace is that I'm coming into a place that already has a culture of creation care. And creation care is the word that I and a lot of Lutherans tend to use, and a lot of religious people. The word environment gets to be kind of a buzzword for some people and has some political connotations that are uncomfortable. And also saying creation care helps us put a little bit of a God spin on it, that God is our creator, kind of reminds us that that's why we do this work. So Peace has a culture of creation care, but hasn't done a whole lot yet. We have a pretty big garden, vegetable garden, and the food grown there goes to the local food shelf. And we've done some of the initial upgrades to property, things like working on our heating and cooling systems, working on our lighting and trying to switch out the light bulbs. But we're in a process of trying to relook at our property and see what we can do with our own house. I don't know what's been done with advocacy so far in getting a political voice out there, but I have a feeling with me as their pastor that's going to come.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds
And
awesome.
people are ready. People are excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's a great opportunity for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
definitely.
it really is.
Good. And as a Christian, how do you feel how important it is for environmental issues with your faith?
Yeah. There's a couple of reasons I feel particularly called to work on the environment. One is, for me, nature has always been a place where my spirituality flourishes. And when places that I love are being threatened, I feel like my faith and my experience of faith is being threatened. And I hear from so many people that they don't like church, but they love going hiking. And I'll say I can appreciate that. And there's something that happens, I think, to connect you with the divine, to connect you with God when you're out in nature, that is unique and precious and important for our spirituality. I also come at this from an issue of concern for humanity. I think as a Christian we're called to care for the poor, called to do acts of justice, and looking globally and locally, usually people who are the most hurt by environmental degradation are people who can least afford it. So we saw this in Katrina, that with the destruction of those wetlands, the people that were most affected were people who had nothing else. So from a justice issue. And thirdly, from a scriptural issue, or a scriptural perspective, the first commandment given to humanity by God in the garden was to keep the earth. And I don't know, well, there are a lot of theories as to how we got away from that calling, but the way that human destiny and the earth's destiny are tied throughout Scripture, it's to me an undeniable argument that we have to work and tend to our relationship with the earth in order to be faithful to our God.
Okay. And also, I should put this, I guess, also with the perspective of the Lutheran Church here in this area. Yeah. Have you experienced or seen, or are you aware of any of the local Lutheran churches that have been involved in any action or kind of like causes around the environment, discussing those issues?
Yeah. Do you mean politically or in terms of the kind of things that they're doing?
I guess it could be a combination of both.
One of the first churches, maybe in the top 5 or so in Washington, D.C. to get solar was a Lutheran church right on Capitol Hill, Reformation Lutheran. And a number of Lutheran churches in the Washington, D.C. area are doing things. We've got a couple of places that are doing natural habitat reclamation with their grounds. We've got a lot of people who are putting in gardens. One of our local retreat centers went geothermal. So people are working on a lot of different levels. And one of the things you see with congregational work is that it tends to be a cultural shift. So things happen in the worship service, prayers. Almost everybody these days is praying for creation. Political action, working on property, doing worship services that, like a lot of churches I know, are doing blessings of the animals next week. And it's this whole kind of holistic approach. And I think about half the local Lutheran churches are doing something that would qualify as creation care work right now.
Okay. And how does Greater Washington Interfaith Power and Light connect their work with what's going on with your church?
Yeah. Greater Washington Interfaith Power and Light is definitely a huge resource for us. So I was just talking with Joelle, the director, And the new congregation I'm serving is thinking of going solar, and I was saying to her, okay, who else has done it?
Right.
And so often in denominations, we get to be conversation partners with ourselves.
Right.
But
right.
so much of this work is being done by other people where theology isn't the problem, or church practices wouldn't divide us. We have so much in common around this that it only makes sense to share resources and also support one another. And if there's anything people of different faiths should be able to get together on, it's caring for this earth that we share. And so it's just kind of a no-brainer to have it be an interfaith network that helps support and help build those relationships.
And what environmental actions that you have done that you are most proud of?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, actually, probably the thing that comes to mind is that we did a baptism in a river at my former congregation. And the way that happened, some people cleaned up the river first, and then they got the idea of if a baptism could happen there, and then the kids had to clean up the woods that led from the church to the river. And then there was just this sense as we were outside doing the most precious sacrament, or one of the most precious sacraments for us, and doing it in water that was like real water connected to a real river. Everything kind of came together, and it wasn't an environmental action in the way that it was like a Greenpeace-y kind of action, but the way it linked for all of us in worship, our connection with nature was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It was really powerful.
And what would you say to someone who comes up to you and says, I'm passionate about the environment, I want to take action, I've been inspired, I've seen all these things been happening in the news and watching television, and they come to you, but they're not sure how to get started.
Yeah.
How would you guide that individual?
Yeah, I would try to find out from them a little bit more about what their passion is. So their passion might be public action, and then I would try to direct them to some of the more public things, the coal-fired power plant actions, or kind of big activism kind of events. If their gift is writing, I would help them think about maybe starting an environmental blog or connecting with some other writers. If they're interested in recycling, helping them shape a church or a community's recycling programs. I'd also ask them about their own home and their own practices, and challenge them to think a little bit about their transportation, and are they driving more often than they need to? Is there a way to get public transportation to be more a part of their life? Is there a partnership with other people in their neighborhood where they could just start locally cleaning up a park or working on a stream? There's so many different levels that you can work at for environmental issues, and I would really encourage people to start with the thing that they're interested in. And one of the things that happens so often with people working on this is that you get guilty because it's such a huge issue, and it is just something that like you're never going to be able in your own life to be pristine about. We have to get around. We have to turn on lights. Well, maybe a few people don't, but you're never going to live a totally pristine life. And I encourage people to get over the guilt as fast as possible and just do what they can. And it grows as soon as you start working in your own life and you meet other people. It grows.
And I just want to get your opinion also with the faith, the environment, and especially with the interfaith movement, more younger people are involved.
Yeah.
How can young people, I guess, cultivate those kind of relationships, not only within their church or their faith tradition, but also connect with other communities, or maybe, like I said, like the person may come up to you and have those questions, but what about, I guess, if you have any opinions from the interfaith perspective, how can different communities really connect? I know Greater Interfaith is one of them, but particularly with the younger generations, how can they connect? Because they seem to be they're more out. I seem like they're out there, not to say that the older generations aren't, but I see them like as visionaries, so.
Yeah, I feel conflicted, I'll say, about the younger generation, because I feel like a lot of them are out there and passionate, but also not being critical of their own lifestyles. And I mean, it's so hard to draw a generalization. So to really, if I find people who have a passion, to ask them to be really careful about scrutinizing their own life and to start there. Even like, how long are your showers? How hot do you need that water to be? And these kind of things. Like, think really carefully about your own house. It's, in terms of connecting people, obviously social media things are good and important, and especially interfaith, because that's where people can have dialogue in the times that are extra. But coming together face-to-face, I think, is also really important. So every once in a while, there are these interfaith worship services. One of my favorite opportunities is coming up, and that's Thanksgiving. I don't know when this is going to air, so maybe that's already happened. But Thanksgiving, because it is not a religious holiday first, it's a time where a lot of communities have the opportunity to do interfaith worship services.
Right.
And because it's already something that's tied in with the bounty of the earth, there's just this great possibility for making Thanksgiving an interfaith, creation-oriented celebration, and to get FaceTime together to pray together. Sometimes we're not positive that we're all worshiping the same God, and there's conflict there, but we can generally come together and pray. We can generally come together and eat. We can generally come together and sing something or laugh. And starting with those kind of human relationship building events, I think that helps, especially young people, come together. Because I'm a fan of social media, but something special happens in face-to-face community. And when we're talking about the earth, one of the things that the earth teaches us, is that the physical presence of God in our lives is unmatchable. And that shows up in each other, too. So the kind of physical face-to-face stuff is important.
Oh, totally agree with you. And if our viewers want to find out more about you or your church, or if they're interested in attending the services, how will they be able to get in contact or learn more about what your church is doing?
Yeah, they can Google Peace Lutheran Church. Sharingpeace.org is our website. Also, I'm a blogger, and my blog is The Barefoot Pastor at Blogspot. So if you Google, or just Google me, and you'll come up with my blog, The Barefoot Pastor.
Oh, that's great. And what inspired that title?
When I was ordained, I was barefoot when I was ordained. And it was partially connection with the earth, partially connection with people around the world who go barefoot because of necessity and not having shoes. And partly there's lines in Scripture about when you're in the presence of the holy, you should take off your shoes. And it's a stance of humility and a stance of connection to the earth. Although, really, I just did it because the Spirit moved me in the moment to take off my shoes, and so I did. And then afterward, it was like, that was a really meaningful thing. So somebody started calling me the Barefoot Pastor because of that event, and it just kind of stuck.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, it seems like you have so much passion and the connection, and it's like that, I guess, like that inner, spirit motivation going on there, and it's very awesome to hear that you're doing so much out there in the community. And
I wish I could do more, but it's one of the wonderful things about being a pastor, is that you can pour your passion into it.
Okay, that sounds good. And the work you're doing with Greater Washington Interfaith Power and Light is very meaningful, especially for this area, because definitely, it's a lot of transition going on, and people have been concerned about the environment in certain areas, and it's always good to hear that the different communities are out there educating the public as well as their spiritual communities about these issues. So we do appreciate the work that you and Greater Washington has done for us.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Also, Sara, do you have any stories or any kind of things you would like to share with us in addition to our discussion today?
Sure. One of the things that that's important in the Lutheran tradition, and I think a lot of traditions, is a sense of calling. And I definitely view this work as part of my calling as a pastor and as a Christian. And I had a really powerful experience once in my early 20s. I distinctly remember where I was. I was rollerblading along a lake in Minnesota, which is where I was living at the time. And I stopped, and I had this idea that I was going to start the environmental Lutheran movement called ELM. And I wasn't a pastor at that point. I had studied biology in college, so I kind of had always been interested in environmentalism, but my faith was really important to me. And that moment has always stuck with me as this sense of deep calling to put my faith and the environmental issues that I care about together. Fast forward to now, I don't need to start ELM because there's something called Lutherans Restoring Creation, the LRC, which is our national network of Lutheran churches working together. And the Washington, D.C. Metro Synod is a member of them. We work with them, and there's this great network of Lutherans. But I go back to that moment for myself anytime I start to think, is this is this really what I should be doing? Is this my passion? And I realized that part of being who I am, Sara, just as a person, pastor, whatever, is that I'm going to work on the environment. And how that plays out in my life, I never know what the next turn is going to be, but it's been fun just to track that thread and see. I didn't go into becoming a pastor because I wanted to work in the environment, but it keeps popping up. So that's my sense of calling to it.
Yeah, because they always say, like, when something repeats itself over and over and over again, and you're pulled more to it internally and your intuition kicks in, that's usually like your calling. Yeah. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So rollerblading around Lake of the Isles in Minneapolis led me to where I am now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sara, for coming on the program.
Yeah,
we
thank
appreciate
you for
having
having
you
it.
here.
Yeah.
We appreciate your work and your involvement in Greater Washington Interfaith Power and Light. So we're
Jackie.
so excited to hear and share your stories with us. And I'm sure our viewers learned a lot about you and your work, as well as your faith tradition and how they've been involved in getting the word out about the environment and climate change. So we definitely appreciate
If it inspires one person to do one thing, it's been worth it.
Right, thank you. No problem. You're welcome. And we will be right back.
When you need a student loan, when you're looking for Social Security information, when you need a passport for that safari in Botswana, they're ready. For all your government information, call the folks in red, white, and blue. 1-800-FED-INFO.
Too many of our kids are overweight.
They're headed for diabetes, heart problems, or worse.
They need to eat healthy things like vegetables, fruits, high-fiber vegetarian foods.
For more information and a free booklet, visit our website or call toll-free.
Welcome back to Interfaith Connections. I am Jackie, your host, and we are still discussing faith in the environment. Today, we have here in the studio with us our guest, Chris Philpott, who is the author of Green Spirituality, and he is doing a tour here in the U.S., and we are honored to have him on the program. Thank you, Chris, for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, first question for our segment, what inspired you to write Green Spirituality?
Well, everybody has children, and in 1981 I had children, and I thought, I'm going to bring these kids up. What about the state of the planet? I looked around and I thought there weren't many books that had plain English, simple environmental books that people could understand what was going on. So I thought that was a need. Then I thought, there's also a very materialistic culture, not many people of faith. Let's give a choice and information about different spiritual traditions so people can see there's an alternative way of life, a more spiritual life. And I thought also, if it made people aware of what was happening, that was the only right thing, particularly about climate change. Give them the information, they can make the choice. But what I thought also is that we've forgotten the wisdom in the Bible, in the Quran, and different traditions about how we should behave in relation to the environment and each other. And I also wrote this book for America because I realized the lifestyle of America had put 30% of the CO2 accumulated in the atmosphere ever, and they were going to do more. I thought the Americans needed to change, and that's why I'm funding my trip here myself, to see people of faith, to see if they can motivate people in America to think about our Earth.
Oh, awesome. And what inspired you to design the cover for this book with the Earth and the symbols?
I just thought, you bring your hands in prayer, it's a very symbolic gesture, but if you hold the Earth underneath, it shows that there are people on this planet who really care, though, really, not selfish people. Don't think of their lifetime. I think the whole thing is that wonderful holding of the Earth, but also all that wonderful wisdom, all those symbols in the background, reminding people that people, even in this country, Native American Indians have been here 10,000 years, and looking at the museums in this wonderful country, they had a lifestyle which is sustainable. We can learn from them.
Exactly. And how has your tour been in the U.S. so far, and how has the book been received by those who've been to your events?
Well, people who read the book think it's a common sense book. I wanted to write a book that wasn't all full of long words, loads of charts. Mine's all about bullet points and a few figures, United Nations figures about what's happening with climate change, water, air, food. I go into the whole lot. I sort of bring spiritual values and the environment together, which I thought was an idea that people hadn't done much of. So it's been well received, and I've been to all over the Canadian cities, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto. I've been to New York, where I talk in front of the UN building at the UN church, and there was a big response there. They thought it was very positive. I've been in Philadelphia as well. So I'm going on to, I'm obviously talking in Washington, then Atlanta, New Orleans, Chicago, Denver, to the west, Seattle, down to San Francisco and Los Angeles. So I'm covering quite a lot in 3 months.
Okay. And I'm just curious, during the time, has it been more of the churches? Have you been to different mosques or synagogues?
No, it's more churches. Okay. And I tell you, the church that stands out is the Unitarian Church. I've been very interested. And there's also a Unity Church in Seattle. There's a lot of interfaith type churches. But it's not saying that Christians aren't concerned. Because part of my mission is to make sure that America reminds itself of its Christian roots, that people came here from England and Europe, they were persecuted, and these people can inspire a new to remind people of the Christian values, particularly equity, sharing wealth, but also caring for the earth. It's in the Bible, it's very plain to me, and people seem to have forgotten that. And we need reminding of the wisdom.
And do you think there's ways, and your book would be one of them, to kind of, I guess, educate or make it?
Yeah.
Because I know our country, usually things have to be very, like, powerful, explosive, or very sexy. Yeah. So it's like with the environment.
Well, yeah, I've tried. We've got to look at what we can do and not say a despair, oh, we can't do anything. I was yesterday in a Quaker church in Philadelphia, and I shared the platform with somebody from Media. Now, Media is the first transition town in Virginia. Transition town movement started in the UK. Transition town simply means we're facing climate change, oil is running out, what do we do as citizens? And there was Shari on one side and me on the other, and I presented the Green Spirituality, and then we talked about transition towns in Media and Leamington Spa, where I come from. We're showing people that you can get your local food, you can develop local energy, you can work together to form a local economy. You don't have to have big corporations running things. People can start where they are. And that's my message really to America. With all these problems, look at transition towns. There is Transition Town America. Look at what you can do in your community. And I applaud the media locally of putting these ideas out, because perhaps in mainstream it's harder to get space.
So would you also consider that one of the main challenges, or were there any other challenges while writing and promoting your book?
Well, getting around. I come not to judge America, I come to understand it. I know that there's been environmental problems. But my main mission really is to try and get Americans to think of the great people like Edison, people like Gates, Microsoft. You've got a whole history of innovation. What we need is innovation in producing a low-carbon economy. Let's have more solar, let's have more wind. Let's celebrate what's happening in America rather than criticize all the time. Texas are about to produce most of the electrical energy with wind power. Now, you wouldn't associate that with Texas.
Right, exactly.
But they're leading the world, and America, I think, has to invest more resources, and I'm hoping, it's sad to me that the elephant in the room on the presidential election is climate change and oil running out. But I can understand the difficulties of having that debate. But I hope if the new president gets in, there will be a push to cut the carbon. And we have things like in states where governors are refusing to have coal power plants. In Michigan, they refused it. The governor, she said, no, we're not having it. Okay. So there's lots of positive things here.
Okay. And would you share a segment from your book?
Yeah, I'd like to read a little bit about what people do. They think, they hear all this bad news about hurricanes, the environment, and everything, and they just turn off. Right. Well, don't turn off. Get together with other people. This is the final chapter of my book is called "We Are the Emergency Services." So it says, what does this new future look like? Well, act on whatever you feel passionate about. Do it in your own way. If you don't already know, listen out. It may be a social justice issue, public health, or about green space. Invite awareness. Take walks in nature. Allow her to teach you. We don't have enough time in nature. If it works for you, join others in what you do, or get others to join you. Avoid reinventing the wheel. Find others who are doing the same things, like transition towns. Join a transition town. Whole food cooperative. Join a whole food cooperative. Remember, while we need to be doing what we do now less destructively, we also need new values, which is where spirituality comes in, thinking about spiritual values. New attitudes and new aspirations, new visions. And look at ways you can leverage your impact, your effectiveness in what you're saying. One is here today on local media in America. So look for allies that have your vision. Come together with people. And that's why churches and faith are so important, because people are in an institution where they can get together. So these are the thoughts. And finally, think globally, act locally. Be aware of global environmental problems, which are presented quite well in this book and very plain. Think of the global problems, but say, what can I do in my town? And people of faith, people of spirit are concerned about the environment. You've already got churches, you've got institutions. Let's use them.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the program. I appreciate the whole discussion, and definitely look forward to seeing you and hearing more about you and your book and your endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching this edition of Interfaith Connections on Faith and the Environment. To check out more about everyone who has been on this program, you can go to our website at www.interfaithconnections.squarespace.com. And again, thank you for watching. Goodbye.